Paint your pet. Here I have an example of what we're going to do today. Now this isn't my pet, but I thought he was so cute. This one is done in a mix of watercolor and acrylic. So this is the one I'm going to be working on. This was my daughter's dog, Jenny, and she passed away about 2 years ago. And so I wanted to do this as a Christmas present for her. So this demonstration is going to be painting Jenny. And what I like about this is my iPad. What I like about the iPad is you can have it right by you, and you can actually, get closer in to see some of the objects that are a little harder to see. And so I like working with the iPad there. I'm going to be using the 300-gram Arches paper. It's better to use a thicker paper just so you don't get the wrinkling. And I'm going to adhere it to my board using tape. It would be better to actually do this on a stretched piece of paper. So if you do have a stretched piece of paper, and for watercolorists, that will be what they normally do. That would be better. But if you don't stretch your paper, it should be okay as long as you have really good sticky tape that's going to hold it down. So I went ahead, took a black and white photo of my little Jenny. A couple things as you're choosing your reference photo that you want to be aware of. And that is, you want to capture the character of your pet. And a lot of that is in the eyes. So you want to make sure that the dog is at eye level and you're not actually looking down at your dog. I think a better portrait is one where you're almost at eye level. You're capturing that special characteristic that says, I love you, that dog looking at you. So this one I upped the contrast a little bit because it was just black and white. And I do suggest printing it out in color to get your colors if you want to keep those colors, but also black and white, because black and white show you the tonal values. And you could actually paint this dog pink if you wanted to. And as long as you have your total values right, it's going to look okay. I mean, other than it'll be a pink dog, but printing it out in black and white photocopy actually really helps you see those differences and those mediums and the light values and the dark values. So I actually made the reference photo to the size that I wanted. This is a little bit dark. And what I did is I went ahead and I drew on tracing paper here the outline so I could see it a little bit better. It was hard to read with this particular photocopy. So this is what I did. It's a very quick little sketch, but what you want to pay attention to is the eyes, and the nose, and don't make shortcuts like make a round circle. Like really look at your lines, and it's better to do short little lines because those little bits make a difference. And to getting the right perspective, to getting those angles right. So pay really close attention as you're copying of the angles, and that's really going to help give it a more realistic look. So what I did is I put this up on my window and I traced my watercolor paper over top and was able to get it on my watercolor paper. And then I adhered my watercolor paper to a stiff board that is covered in a plastic wrap. So if you can go to Drawing Sheets, I have it on my website and it's a free program to follow. It'll show you different ways of actually transferring it to your paper and making a copy from your photograph. Alternatively, if this was a stretched piece of paper and I couldn't put it up to my window, I could actually put the carbon paper underneath, tape it down, make sure you get the right side, the darker side down, line it up, put it on, and traced over with a pen, and that would have worked as well. It's also cleaner to actually do it on the window, and most people have access to a window there. So that's what I would suggest as your first go-to. Now, do not use wax paper to do this, because what's going to happen is you're going to transfer the wax onto your watercolor paper, which will resist the paint. So you want to make sure if you're going to go the tracing paper route that you actually have real tracing paper. So don't try and make a shortcut by using wax paper. I've drawn the picture out very lightly with a pencil, and we are going to outline this in a couple of different options. Just going to show you a few different things that you could use. Now you could use a drawing marker and you could outline it just like that. You won't get the kind of free flow that you get in some of the other techniques I'll show you. And you can actually use different thicknesses, which will give you different looks. Just make sure whatever marker you use that it is permanent and fade resistant, waterproof, because you don't want it to smudge all over when you put your paint on it. So most of them will say whether it's waterproof or not, water permanent markers. This one says fade proof, fade resistant, and smudge proof. If in doubt, put your marker on your paper, take a little bit of water on a brush and see if it smears. So you don't really want it to smear if you're going to go that route. The other route is using some of these pens that you can fill. So these pens you can buy, they're empty when you buy them, and you can fill them up with whatever color paint you want. Now this is filled up with a golden product called High Flow, and this is a little bit different than the next step up, which is a fluid, and I'll show you that in a minute. But High Flow, it does just that. It flows really, really far. It really flows like an ink. And the equivalent of it would be something like an acrylic ink like this, called an artist ink, acrylic artist ink. The High Flow Golden would respond very similar to this. Next up in viscosity or thickness is the fluid acrylics by Golden. So I'm actually going to be demonstrating with using a fluid. It doesn't flow quite as much as the High Flow, so I have a little bit more control. It's a little thicker, and I'm going to do that. Now, one thing I wanted to mention is that they do have a new line of matte acrylics as well. So you got to make sure that when you're buying it, you check that. It's a little harder to see. Matte fluid there. So you do have a matte color as opposed to more of a glossy in the black, the carbon black here. This one's, you can see the difference there. It's got a little bit more of a sheen in this one. This one is more flat. So they do have that option too, which is nice if people really like that flat look. So you just fill up these things. These are filled up with fluid because they flow a little nicer like an acrylic ink. They have different nibs, different shapes. This is a wedge. You always got to make sure if you're using the fluids that you give a good shake. It has a ball in it there, and the paint seems to settle a little bit, especially when it's a mixed color like this. So this one's a High Flow, a little bit of a different nib. And the metallic ones don't seem to flow quite as nicely. There's a metallic copper color, and that's a wedge as well. They don't seem to flow as nice. So I would probably recommend not using the iridescent ones in here. And they also have, look at this one, ginormous marker. It's for really big applications. But this one is a silver as well. Needs a good shake. You can also use a Sharpie. It's a permanent marker. That worked as well. I tested that and it doesn't bleed. So there's different kind of ways that you can actually outline. But today I'm going to be outlining with a Gouda bottle. This is a Gouda bottle here. I think they're usually used for silk painting. And what you do with this is you usually outline your object, because with silk it just goes crazy, and so you make a little confined area with a raised application of the paint using one of these, and then when you apply your more watercolor like dyes, they are contained within that shape. So this particular one comes with 3 different tips, and they just go on the top here. And I fill these up both with the fluid and the High Flow. On this one, I'm going to use the fluid because I have a little bit more control with it that way. And I'm going to paint with the High Flow to give a watercolor-like effect. This is another type of bottle you could buy. It's called a fine line applicator. This is a standard tip. And I think I have High Flow in here. So it flows, whoa, you can see how quickly that flows. And here's the difference with the fluid. See how it holds its own a little better? And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be spraying it. So I'm just going to see if it will move. They both move pretty nice, but look at that. See how crazy that goes? They both kind of give you a lot of movement, but the high flow will flow a whole lot more than the fluid. So it might be good as you're doing this to practice a little bit before you get to your actual drawing. And one of the things I will say when you're using these Gouda bottles is that you need to clean these out every time you use it, because it's a very fine tip and it just dries in there and then you'll never be able to use it again. You can use a pin and keep it in the top to keep it for a while, but I find it's best to take off the tip and rinse it out as well as possible, and it'll last a little bit longer. Some of these are so fine I can't even get a pin down them. Rinse them out really, really good, dry them off, and then you'll get more than one use out of them. You need to practice your pressure as you do this. We're going to be outlining, so you don't want to press too hard in the beginning, otherwise you'll get a blob. And then practice with a spray bottle, spraying it. You don't want to give it too much water. Now I'm using a smaller spray bottle, and what works better, rather than having like a perfume mist where it's a steady mist everywhere, it actually works better if you actually stick a pin in the top of the sprayer so that the spray comes out uneven. Then you're going to get more variety in your sprays, and it's not going to drench it quite as much. One of the things I like is this bottle here, ugly as sin, but it finally took me all these years. I kept on losing it, could not find it amongst all my stuff, so I painted it bright pink, and now I can find it. But it is like a garden sprayer, so it has an adjustment here, so you can adjust how much spray. I always test it on my hand first before I go to my paper, just so I can see what the spray is like. The tendency with something this big though would be to spray it too much and then your paint's going to run like crazy. So do a little bit of practicing on a spare piece of paper, just getting the feel of it, getting the feel of the Gouda bottle if that's what you have. Then you can go to your drawing, which I'm going to do now. For those not usually working with acrylic, or this is your first time using acrylic, yes, it does stain, and it stains your clothes, and you can't get it out very readily unless you have fantastic spray. Fantastic spray works fantastic for getting acrylic out. Best to get it out as soon as you see it's in your clothes, or otherwise just wear clothes that you don't care if you get it in. So we're going to start here. Now, I am just going to be using black. You can use different colors. On the example I showed you here, I actually use a white acrylic on here. In here, and you're going to get different effects with each of them, and you can do what you want. You're going to need 2 Gouda bottles if you have different colors, and I've used bronze color, all different colors, so you can kind of experiment with that. With this, I'm just going to demonstrate the black, and I'm already covered in it myself, so I'm just going to go and very quickly, kind of loosely, I'm going to start with giving my outline. I don't want a complete cartoon outline. I want a little bit of freedom, a little bit flow. You've got your pencil there. Don't feel as if you have to exactly keep with it. It's just there as a reference. Try not to get your hand in it. But what I was doing when I was making my sketch was actually looking for the light areas and the dark areas. Here's a dark area here, which I'm going to fill in a little bit. But be a little bit free and fun. The more fun and freedom you have as you paint, it reads. It reads in your painting. If you're too precise and too concerned about how it's going to turn out, it shows as a tightness, and you don't have that same kind of freedom that you'd have if you're just having a little bit of fun. And you don't have to outline everything. Leave some things to the imagination. It doesn't have to be perfect. I would say be way more careful around the eyes. Be careful not to run my hand through it. Now, this dog has white eyelashes, and so I'm going to do that, I think, afterwards. Oh, okay, so I've gone a little bit far here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spray. Some of it's dried, so some of the stuff I originally started with, so I want that kind of loose freshness. So it doesn't look so tight. Oops, okay, that's a lot, so I'm going to dab. And you can see where it had been drying a little bit, didn't run quite as much. There, that was a little bit fresher, and so it really ran a lot. And if you use the high flow, it's going to run even more than that. So you can keep dabbing it up. Oh, look what I did. I double dabbed. Good. You want to be careful not to do that. I didn't mean to double dab there. Let's see if we can get some of that out. Oh. We can reduce that later, but you don't want to get the same double dab because you'll be putting stuff down like I just did. Oh. Couldn't help myself. Might want to change directions a bit. Woo! That's okay because that nose is going to be black anyways. Gives it some texture. A little bit up there. A little bit there. Just trying not to overdo it. One has some hard edges and some soft edges, but not too much. Look at me, I'm already covered. Oh no! Okay, I'm gonna wait a little bit because I've actually wet the paper, so let's see what happens when I do this. I don't want it to go crazy. But you're also going to get a different effect too when the paper, look, see how it is when the paper is wet. It's a different look too. I'm just going to do these. It's going to spread a bit. But you know what? I am going to wait until the eyes are fully dried because I do not want them to spread too much. Those are really important, the eyes. So I'm just going to wait a little while. You don't want to overdo it. Less is more. There we go. I keep watching how far that's spreading. Trying to use a clean spot of tissue. And I'm just going to look at my reference photo a bit as I fill in this eye. As I said, I'm going to do the white eyelashes later. Pay attention to the way the direction of the hair when you're doing something with hair. Follow the direction of the hair. It gives definition to the eye and to the contour of the dog. So I'm looking for the dark areas, the medium areas, the light areas. Just adding a bit of definition, a little bit of fun, trying to capture the character. I'm going to leave that to completely dry. I'm going to look closer at my iPad for that eye so I get that eye looking just the way it needs to. The shape of the eye. There we go. So we're going to let that dry. Okay, so here I'm going to try my core palette, trying out some new colors, new paints. Not exactly sure all the colors I'm going to use right now, but I'm just going to tell you what they are. I've got Dyelide Yellow, Aureolin Yellow, Nickel Azo Yellow, Queen Gold Deep Raw Umber, Van Dyke Brown, Transparent Pyrrole Orange, Transparent Red Oxide, Permanent Alizarin Crimson, Queen Violet, Cobalt Violet, Ultra Pink, Phthalo Blue, French, Cerulean Blue, Ultramarine Blue, Violet, Terra Verte, Viridian Green, and Payne's Gray. Now this is just a palette I had put out. I had some samples of these. So I wrote down the words first and then I put the paint over top. So you can see this quite granulated, quite semi-opaque here. Cobalt violet, you see the granulation there. And some of the other ones are very transparent. You can see how it looks above the permanent marker. So you can see how transparent those are. A little bit of granulation there, a little bit more opaque here. This one being the most opaque. So these are the colors I'm going to try. You by no means need to get all these colors. I've got an awful lot on the yellow orange side. It's not my regular palette that I use, but I just want to try something different with these watercolor colors. You use the ones that you have. Hopefully you understand the differences between granulation and transparent and semi-transparent, opaque and semi-opaque, and you can apply those principles as you paint. If you don't, you may want to try out the Beginner 101 watercolor, which I go into quite a lot of detail about transparent, lifting colors, opaque colors, granulation colors, and warm and cool colors, and what happens when you mix those. So that is something you might want to check out if you don't already know those basics. So here is my lovely Jenny. We're going to just start with the background first. I'm going to do it really loose, and I'm going to try give you a sample of a couple different brushes. So here's a mop brush. Now you don't need this. You can go with the ones that you have, but I want to show you how a mop brush works. If you're a beginner, you don't really want to start with a mop brush. They are so absorbent. They take so much water. It's really hard to control that if you're just beginning out. But I want to just show you what a mop brush does for the background. I'm going to be using my number 8. This is a lovely Kolinsky Sable brush that I have. I'm going to be using this one as well. This is my 1.5 inch, and that's a Winsor Newton Scepter Gold. And this is another wide, it's 3/4 inch flat, and this is 100% sable, Kolinsky Sable as well, which I love. So those are the brushes I'm going to be using right now, especially to start the background. Now I don't have any fresh paint out here. These are old colors, and you can see a little bit dirty, so I can actually just recharge them all like this, just putting water on. I'm wasting very little, just recharging them. Just let them sit a bit. It makes a difference. Great thing about core watercolors is what you see is what you get. They are so pigmented. We're going to do a loose wash on the back. I'm going to just show you my example. This guy here, so cute. So I went all different colors here. I did yellow, and then I did some green and blue, a lot of cobalt blue. Up in here, just had some fun with that. I think I did a couple layers there. I actually was trying for some blossoms and blooms, which are kind of fun. So maybe we'll do that with this guy as well. So I'm going to start, and with watercolor, your time is limited, so you always want to be charging up your colors first and getting them going. So I'm going to start with my lighter color. Let's just get some yellows going here. I'm going to get them charged up. I'm looking for a little bit creamier because I'm going to do a wet and wet here. Don't want to waste my colors, so I'm not swishing in my water. I'm getting it off my brush. Off my brush there. I'm going to mix up a couple of different colors. I love that Quin Gold Deep, so I'm going to get some of that. Get some Van Dyke's Brown going. Violet, so it's quite purpley. So some of them don't recharge quite as well. Like, see that? It's you'll find that with the cobalts as well. They don't charge up as fast. So when you're doing a big area, it might be good to put some fresh paint from your tube, and that's why I always recommend people having tube paint. So I'm going to go over first and wet the area. I'm doing the background, not the dog, so I'm going over with my big wide brush, and I'm quickly doing the area in the background of the dog. I don't really want to go over too much the edge, because remember, where it's wet, that's where the paint's going to flow. Where it's dry, it's going to stop and give you a harder edge. So you want to control your wet edge and your dry edges. And you see how many times I'm going over and putting more and more water on there? It really absorbs in there. This is 300-gram paper, so it'll stay wet for a while. Okay, now I could use this brush to put on paint, but I wanted to show you what the mop brush is like. Oh my goodness, it just absorbs so much water. So be aware of that. I'm going to pick up my paint, but there is so much water in there. Just picking up a little bit more. It is hard to control for beginners. And it's just like it says, it's like a mop brush. Now getting those hairs on there will make a difference. If you're not using core, you got to pump up your colors. Look at how that flows. I love watercolor. I'm doing a wet and wet in here. You got to pump up your colors 25% because it's going to dry lighter. Now, you can always go back and put another layer on. That's not a problem. Just look at how much goes down, how quick. When you put one color, it's always good to put another color. And I'm flicking a little bit, which I like. I like that. And this Van Dyke Brown is, I'm seeing it's granulating lovely. Okay, so I'm thinking about lights and darks, and I really should have light because his ears are quite dark. And I'm just going to soften some of these edges. So getting a damp brush. You don't want to go full from the water to here when you're softening the edge. You want to tap it off or just dab it on your tissue once. And I'm just softening some of those edges because I'm not ready to see that granulation. Oh, I love that. Okay, so this brush is holding a lot. So I'm going to go in with my flat purpley. Oh, well, there you go. That's really bright. I'm going to get greens if I mix my blue with my yellow. But it can do some cool things. Let's just see. Letting it mix on the paper. Got some interesting combinations there. That phthalo blue is so rich. So what I'm striving for here is variation, variety, looseness. I'm trying to make a more neutral background. The dog's the main story. Picking up just a little bit. Oh wow, the thing with your Kolinsky brushes, they pick up so much water, so much paint. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of splatter in here. Every brush is going to give you a different type of splatter. Your rounded brush is going to throw the paint differently. And since I'm going in a second time here, wow, look at how that flows. Since I'm going in a second time, you got to have more paint less water. Every time you go in, you need to change the paint to water ratio. Otherwise you'll get blossoms, but maybe we want to get blossoms. I kind of like that. That's kind of cool. Oftentimes when you want to get blossoms, you can't get blossoms. I'm seeing a hard edge here. I want to soften that edge a bit. Now this is the back of the dog, so it's okay that the background blends over a little bit into it. Softening some of these edges. This back ear can have a little bit of bleeding in there because as things go in the distance, they fade out a little bit. I think I'm going to throw a little bit more of that blue. Let's splatter with our rounded brush. Maybe, let's see, some more excitement in here. Well, my white walls in my studio are covered with splatterings all over the place. Kind of like we're still at the semi-gloss stage. I can still work a little bit. Grab a little bit more of that yellow I was using. I got some up there. I want to repeat it. Whoa, that's really bright. So it's nice to have unusual mixes of the colors. Now some of it is starting to dry. I need to stop. Unless, of course, I want blossoms. And I think I do. I think I need something a little bit more in here. I'm going to splatter just water. Woohoo! That was a lot. Okay, now that this is all dry, and I know it's dry by feeling it, and it is warm, not cool, I really want to pump up that background. So we're going to go another layer here. I've actually recharged some colors already. You don't want to scrub your paper here. You want to just lightly go over the top when you're going. You will reactivate some of the paint if you press too hard. I'm kind of holding my brush flat and just kind of skimming over the top. Now, not all papers will allow you to do that, and that's why I say use the Arches 300 gram. It allows you to do this. Other papers will lift, they'll bead, they'll won't react the same way. So it's really important that you use your best paper for the best results. So I've loaded this is a smaller mop brush. I have a little bit more control. I'm wanting to get it quite dark. Oh, never got any paint on it. So this is a raw umber here. It's quite dark. It's almost like a burnt umber, this one, but I'm going to put it in a few places here because I just really want to pop out the white of the dog. So I'd use some Van Dyke's brown. What I'm doing here is I'm kind of anchoring the dog to the page, you don't want to do like a circle around the dog or the, whatever you're using so that it has like a halo around it. And no, I was feeling that blue was a little bit too cool, so here I'm putting that ultramarine blue in there. I think I like that better. Kind of looks different, doesn't it? See how my paper is just flooded with water. Puddles aren't necessarily good. Doesn't actually enhance your paint colors when you have big puddles, and that's why using this is quite challenging because it just has so much like you can see that huge puddle there. It just has so much water. So as I'm doing this, I'm thinking, oh, got the wrong one there. Woohoo! That's kind of cool though. Look at how that flows. I'm thinking about, as I'm putting a second layer on, what I have on my first layer. Because you're going to be looking through the layers, and they're each, whatever you have on the bottom is going to influence what your color is going to look like. Because you're looking through the two colors at the same time because they're transparent. Just picking up some of that extra water. Look at how that natural brush just picks that up. Okay. So, well, you can get water down really quick, and it picks up water really quick. It does put a lot of paint down. So you do have more control if you use your smaller brush. Okay, and as I go in, second time, more, picking up more paint. Okay, so that Van Dyke brown is right here. See the difference? A little more red to that, orangey kind of feel. You don't want to work it too much because it will just mix everything underneath. But I am wanting to create some interest. I'll put some more of this. Again, you don't want to use it quite thick and creamy. Now, don't forget, complements will create a grayed down color. So I am splattering the orange over the blue, which is complements across the color wheel. So I am aware if I were to go smush it all in there, because it would all become mud. But because I'm flicking it and I'm not touching and letting it go with the paper, it's going to not go gray. So that's more of the phthalo blue, just trying to do some color harmony. Where you put in one place, you want it to be in others. Okay. Gonna flick with some water again. Not liking that right there. I think I need a little bit more of that purple. There's no purpley blue. Okay, the sheen is almost gone, but I still have some there. There, that feels better. His ear is going to be quite dark, so I don't want to put too much dark down there. That's a cacophony of colors there. I'm just going to soften the edge here a little bit. So it's kind of in the background. See how wet the paper is? I don't know if you can see how it's just really buckling. So what I do, I cover with certain things. You're wanting a balance of colors and shapes. You know, the yellow appears lighter, but it is nice. But this is the only part of green, so I feel like, and yellow. I feel like maybe we need some more green in there. So I'm going to mix a little bit of that green here rather than just That was actually mixing the blue into the yellow, but here I've got a little bit of green. Repetition of that color on. I'm seeing it's a little bit too wet. Now I'm feeling like it needs a little bit of that purple in there too. Now it's not going to be as fresh as there because that was on the white of the paper. This was on a brown and a green. So it's going to look a little different, but if I actually flick some in there, it'll look fresher. And you see some lovely little granulation. That's the Van Dyke. Look at that. That's just so cool. See how that spreads and does all kinds, and then see how it's granulating there as well. So actually, if you mixed two granulations, so the Van Dyke Brown and the Cobalt, they would separate and look really, really cool. And I do have a little hair right there, but I'm not going to worry about that. You can get a little pin and pull it out, but since it's the background, I'm not going to worry too much about it. Now we're going to build up the dog a little bit, get some darks in. Payne's gray with a little bit of the purple too. We don't have any of that purpley color in there. That's our warm and our cool. This is warmer, this is cooler. You see how that tends towards green, a greeny blue, and that tends towards a reddy purple. I'm going to build up this ear, but you know what? I don't want to do the ears yet because this is really, really wet and it'll just run like that. So I got to wait for that to dry. I am not using any masking fluid, so if I wanted to make it go faster, I could use a blow dryer, but there's a lot of puddles and stuff going on there, and the blow dryer will blow it all over, so it's best to let it dry naturally. So I will often work with more than one brush. I'll apply the color with one brush, and then I'll soften the edge with another one. I'll have one in my mouth. And just see how I'm just grabbing that edge to soften it. Just wiggling it a bit. That black line is quite heavy. So there I am putting it down. I'm going to soften it. Put it in wet. You don't want to push the wet into the color, but what I'm doing is just catching the edge of it and pulling it down. Now this dog is a white dog, but white isn't always white. White has a lot of colors in it. So I'm putting a little bit in here. Soften that edge. I'm looking at the medium values right now. You know, the great thing about this project is you don't have to be really, really great to soften that edge, to be successful in this because you've outlined it. And the outlining helps give it form. Otherwise, you have to create all that form yourself. I'm mixing the ultramarine blue with the
kind of burnt sienna. Well, it's actually not burnt sienna, but it's like a burnt sienna, the Van Dyke's brown. Just to kind of get a chocolatey brown to go over the eyes. So before you can put a second layer on, you need to make sure it's dry. Oh, didn't know that was there. No problem, all gone. Just gonna wet this bottom part here. Blend it in a little bit. I'm gonna use the edge of this, gonna wait. Just gonna kind of lose that edge. Let's just test it. So where it's a dry, you're gonna get those hard edges. And I'm actually making the shadows here, but you don't want all hard edges. So some of them will be a little bit softened. Some will be hard, some of them will be soft. That's more natural. I'm following the hairs. These ones are going this way. Gives it direction. Just a suggestion of where the hair is going. Okay, so we're going to pump up the ears. Use that Payne's gray with a little bit of this orange. No, this would be better. So I show you in watercolor for module 1 on how to create really great blacks by combining your 3 primaries together. I don't know if you can tell on your monitors, but this is kind of a greeny color. So if it has green, then the opposite of green is red. So you put the red in, and red and green would make like a brown, but if you add the other primaries, and see how that's taken away a bit of the green just by adding a bit of red. Just a bit more red there. I'm looking at what it looks like on the palette, how thick it is. It's quite thick. Now, I think this is pretty well drier. So let's just go in here, test it. Oh, it's going quite far. So we don't want to go in too far. Still quite wet. It's kind of filling in. Let's just put a little bit in here. Let's check out this area. One area is wet, you can always go to another one. Here we have our dog, and I have done a little bit off camera, trying to figure out some compositional value issues. And I felt that that black line was a little bit too dominant. And so I put some white. Yes, you can use white in watercolor, and this is a little secret. This is bleed proof white, Dr. P.H. Martin's. There are different brands that you can buy. This is the one I have here. And this goes on opaque. And the great thing about this, is different than acrylic, is that you can paint over it with watercolor paints. And you could buy a gouache, a white gouache, opaque gouache. You could use Chinese white. Thing with using Chinese white is that it reactivates when you try and paint over it, whereas this covers. I mean, this is acrylic ink and look at how it's covered. So this is where it is here. Let me just point it out. In here, I did some white. I did some white on the eyes. I did a little bit of white along here. I had lost that line. A little bit of white here. I'm gonna pump up the ears and make them a little bit black, but right now I want to work on some of the values. And you see here, I printed out the black and white photocopy to see my values, and I didn't find that there was enough value difference in that photo, so I actually upped it. And do you see how you can see here great value differences in this particular black and white photo because I changed the contrast. So you can see shapes here of the lighter parts and the darker parts. And even here you see a darker value right in this shape here. This is a darker value that is really dark right in there, dark in here. And you see this light here. These are the things that you notice when you are looking for shapes that you wouldn't necessarily see if you're not looking for that detail. And these are the things that define the dog better. And just see right here, the value contrast of just that little bit. This is quite dark, but you do have these little bits and that defines the whole snout there. So we want to kind of be careful of those small things that make a big difference. And, you know, the values around the eye, see how it's kind of darker in there, very dark right in here. So I use a black and white printout oftentimes instead of a color one because I can see those things easier. I'm feeling like that's maybe a little bit too dark, a little bit too dark. I want to soften some of those edges. So I have this scrubber brush. This is a big one. And I have a smaller one here. So, well, for a larger area, I'm going to use this one here. I just wet it, dab it on the tissue a bit, and just going to soften very gently, scrub some of those edges to soften some of those edges. Blend it in a little bit better. Look at that. Should be a little bit of a white part in here. See, I'm looking there, white part. Now this is why it's really, really important to understand what is your staining and what is your non-staining colors, because if I use the phthalo blue here, I'll never be able to get that up. This is a Payne's gray, so it is lifting somewhat. But for those who did our Watercolor 1 beginners, you did some lifting projects to see which of your colors you could lift and which you couldn't. So you have that information. So I'm looking at my reference photo and just taking back some of those lights. You don't want to scrub too much with this, especially as it gets saturated. The paper gets saturated because it could actually pill it up, even though it's really good Arches paper. Just softening that a little bit. And as you see, I'm dabbing with a tissue to kind of lift it up. You don't want to double dab. It's looking a little better. I think I need to pump up the values of the darks. I actually think I made this eye too big, so I'm going to actually push into that a little bit and make it appear a little bit smaller. It looks a little cartoonish, so I'm going to push that back. This is quite dark here and here. It's a good value, I think, for here. So we're looking at values. That's quite dark there. Adding that white really helped, which is, you see this here, and that's where I added the white. And that's, smooth that out a bit. And I think I maybe will lift the nose a little bit. So right here, I don't really have that there. So this is the smaller one. Just lift that a little bit. And after it's completely dry, you can go over with a different color. I did put the white down in there. So just that little bit will. And there's a little bit of white there, if you can see that. Right there. So I'm going to lift a little bit right there. comes down here a little bit. So just those little bits, and you see what a difference it makes. Okay. So now I'm going to pump up the eyes a little bit, recharging that black I had there. And of course, the more water you put in, the lighter the color. Yeah, I don't want to do too much. Our tendency is to overdo it. You find if all your edges are hard, it doesn't look quite right. So you can either soften the edge as it's wet, you can soften it after it's dry. Again, I'm lifting here. Just looking at my reference photo. Yeah, I think I'm lifting too much. It's a little bit damp and it was pilling a bit. That little pilling, so that's when you need to stop. Okay, I think I gotta stop. Okay, I'm gonna do something really, really scary. I've been looking at this and I'm not too keen on the background, not feeling like it has is pulling together a little bit too wild. I want to kind of pull it all together, give it some harmony. So what I've done is mixed a very transparent, this is alizarin crimson, and it's very transparent. I got lots of water and I'm going to wash it over my whole background. A little scary, but when you understand how transparent watercolor works, how the colors mingle. So where I have this blue, when you put red over it, it's going to be more of a purpley. Where I have the brown, it's going to be a deeper brown. Where I have the yellow, it's going to turn an orange. And where I have the green, it's going to be more of a muted evergreen color. And it's going to make this a little bit more reddish, but it's going to pull it all together. It's like looking through a transparency. So it's a very staining color. So I want to have a lot of water, not a whole lot of paint color. Using my wide brush, and here I go. I'm just flowing over the top. Oh. So look at how that just pulls the whole background together. Watch how I am holding my brush. I'm just floating it over the top. Now it's going to move some of that lovely granulation just because you are disturbing the surface, but you're still going to see those varieties in there. And just look, I'm going over the edge a little bit, just look how it pulls it all together, and look at this glow over there. Oh my goodness, that's over the yellow, and yellow, that's how you get a really great glow, is you put the yellow down first and then put layers over top. Because I put that red on, I wanted to put a little bit of red into the dog as well. And you'll see that doing a transparent layer of red over gray makes a beautiful variation and really pops your grays so they don't look so flat. So you can see a little bit of that pink I put in there. And you know what? I'm still not loving it. So I am going to go try in with a blue. And blue and red make purple, so it's going to pump up the purples. But it's my cool blue we're just going to go for it. Wanting to just make it a little bit deeper. I'm using the phthalo blue. It's quite strong. So here we go. What's going to happen? Now I kind of want to keep that nice fresh color there. So what I'm going to do is soften the edge with just clear water so I can keep that color because I really like that. But you'll see we're getting a deeper purple in here. Put a little bit more paint over here. I'm going to go right over that back ear. Floating it in. Yeah, I'm liking that better already. So now softening that edge. You have to bring some of that blue in here. Yes, I like that much better.
I'm going to teach you how to frame your watercolor painting without having to put it behind glass. Of course, the traditional way of framing watercolor is to put a mat on it and frame it behind glass. The mat keeps the watercolor away from the frame, and so it allows circulation of air, which is the best way. But what I'm going to show you is a different way of framing your watercolor painting on a cradled panel so that you don't have to put it behind glass. Now, for an example, I'm going to be using a painting I did in acrylic. So the only thing that's going to be different is how you're going to seal your watercolor before you go through this process.
But if you wanted to, like a traditional watercolor, you could actually get a matte board and frame it behind glass and it would look lovely. But what we're going to do is we're going to try something different and we're going to put it on a cradle panel so you don't have to frame it and it looks a little bit more modern. So I was looking at a couple of different sizes. This one's like a 12 by 6 and this one's like an 8 by 10. So in order to see how it would look on my picture, I went ahead and got a transparency and outlined it just to see what would it look like if I did some different things here. Could change it up. And I decided I didn't like it thin like that. I had this one here. This was the larger one. And this looks good. And one word of caution, do not draw this on top of your drawing. Look what I did. I got marker all right here. My transparency ripped and I put permanent marker on my painting. So I just put a little bit of white on there, covered that up, and hopefully we can avoid, that showing too much. So I could actually change the format of it a little bit. I kind of almost like it like that. You want to make sure you're not going to get the white of the paper, but just at a bit of an angle maybe. Just change it up a little bit. We'll just see. And so this is a good way to figure out where you're going to put it. You can change it like this. This you probably wouldn't want to do. You don't usually want your animal looking outside. You want to have the space heavy where the animal's looking. On this side, you see the difference? When you put it like this, just doesn't look right. He's like looking out of the frame. You could put it dead center in the middle, but I'm thinking like kind of like about like that, maybe on an angle. We'll just see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark with pencil where I want. I'm going to cut outside my line just a little bit because after we adhere it to your board, we're going to cut the edges off so they're nice and crisp. And your paper is going to expand a little bit when you wet it with the soft gel paste. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to cut it down and then I'll show you the next step.
Because watercolor recharges when you wet it, you want to make sure you put on an isolation coat. So you want to use a spray varnish as opposed to brushing on your watercolor. And I would recommend either this Camar varnish, which says that it's suitable for watercolor, or a Golden product, a archival spray varnish. And I would recommend 2 coats in gloss. And make sure that when you're spraying, you overspray each side. So you're going over one side left to right, and then overspray the painting, come back, and you're doing smooth motions, just going straight down over the painting. And then you want to dry it flat, wait for it to dry, and then put your second coat on before you progress into the rest of this demonstration. Here's an example of an uncoated, unprotected side on the left side of this picture, and on the right side it has 2 coats of gloss varnish and 2 coats of satin varnish. So you can play with how the finish looks on your watercolor paintings.
So here we have our cradled panel, and I have gone ahead and I have put a coating of soft gel gloss. Here I'm using Golden's soft gel gloss. Doesn't matter if it's gloss or semi-gloss, but the soft gel works better than a heavy body gel. So I would suggest using this because you really got to do this quickly. You got to get it evenly coated. So I'm going to use a nice big brush to do this. And you need to do this fairly quickly because it does dry fast. So I'm going to start with my board. It has been coated. I went back and forth. I've done it once. So this will be the second coat. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure I get every part quickly. But you don't want to really get it along the edges necessarily. You don't want it bleeding through onto the top of your painting. But I've sealed it, and it's really important that you do seal your wood because your wood has acid in it, and that will come through the back of your paper. So that's done really quickly. Now I'm going to get my painting. I'm going to put it down on my piece of plastic here just to keep it clean, and I'm going to do the back of this. And your paper will start absorbing from the back, so that's why you have to do it so quick. And it starts to dry really, really quick. I want to make sure I'm getting it everywhere, but not on the front. And I kind of want it more or less even and kind of quite thick. You don't want to put it on too thinly because you want it to kind of tack and fill in all the little grooves and stuff. You want to remember to wash out your brush. Okay, so I'm going to take that away, put this down in my clean area, and take my board and stick that evenly around. Okay, I'm pressing down from the middle. All right, so one of the things you want to make sure you get any air bubbles out. So I'm going from the center and out to all the corners. If you have a roller, you can actually roll it out, but this works good with the side of your hand as long as you're working from the middle out. So you see here, see how it's kind of gobbing out? You don't want to get that on the top. Just use a bit of tissue. Get rid of that. So making sure there's a good adhesion all along the sides. Once you're pretty sure you got all the bubbles out, you can turn it upside down on a piece of plastic if you'd like, and you put a heavy weight inside. I just got a book that will disperse the weight a little bit, and I'm going to put a big huge bucket on top, and I'm going to leave that till overnight. And then we will go ahead and cut some of the edges after it's dried and just making sure it's adhered really, really well. So it's as easy as that. And then later we can paint the sides any color you want, and you've got a really nice modern contemporary framing that didn't actually cost you that much. I actually got this at the dollar store. You know, they're $3 or $4 at the dollar store. Quite reasonable in different sizes. So that's a pretty inexpensive way to frame your painting, and then it'll be all ready for my daughter for Christmas. And you can actually, after you finish framing these, put these in a lovely floating frame just to give it more oomph. Yeah, just leave that overnight for a while. Okay, here we are. This has been sitting all night, so I'm going to take off my book, and I had a big huge heavy pail on there. And there you see. Look at that, it's all adhered great. So what we have to do now is cut off the edges, the overlapping edges here. Now I'm going to use an X-Acto knife. I'm pulling the knife out quite a lot because you don't want to actually cut it on an angle. You want to make sure that it's up and down, straight up and down. So I want my blade to go right against the wood. You got to be careful too. You can't actually turn it on a bit of an angle, and then as you cut, you're actually cutting into the wood and you're revealing more of the front than you want to. So you want to be sure you're cutting straight down, holding the X-Acto knife right so the blade is against the wood, so you're actually not cutting away the wood. So I'm going to do this one first, like this, because I want to show you another way as well. So please be sure that your knife is very sharp. I've just changed the blade. Oops. And I'm using a cutting mat below, trying to cut straight down against the wood. Nice clean edge. Another way to do it that I thought would give you an even nicer straight edge is by getting your metal ruler and putting it to the side like this. So I'm right-handed. Just making enough room for having the metal edge right up against it, and just making enough room for your blade to fit in there. And this way you press down on the ruler and you're using the edge of the ruler as your straight edge instead of the board. And you can get a straighter line that way. Sometimes your boards aren't completely. A little bit there. There we go. And there you have it. That's looking pretty good. So here's my lovely floating frame. And I'm going to paint the edges, I think, black, so they just kind of disappear. And look how nice that looks. So you see here, I've got a lovely edge all the way around. Now I can paint these sides, and then when you do paint these sides, make sure you paint the edge of the paper too, because it's going to be white. And what I would suggest is not going like this when you paint, because what happens is the brush goes over the edge and you get it on the front of your painting. So paint this way, where you're pulling the paint and you pull up as you come to that edge. And you can smooth it out later, but as soon as you have that edge going over the side, you're going to get stuff on the front, which you're not going to want to do. But before you paint the sides, you need to seal it, especially if you have white paper here, and it will just protect it and make it last longer. So here's my lovely floating frame. And I'm going to paint the edges, I think, black, so they just kind of disappear. And look how nice that looks. Framed modern, you don't need glass, because I'm going to show you how to seal the edge. So you can seal the paper in a number of different ways. One of the ways is with a spray finishing varnish. You have a couple of different options out there, but some of the things you should look for is non-yellowing. This one says it's for oil and acrylic and watercolor, which is nice. And each of them have a little bit of a different finish. So you have your flat, you have your semi-gloss, and you have your gloss. This particular one, the same company, but this one gives more of a satin finish, and I got that by just trial and error. So this is the acrylic coating, and it says it's a protective gloss, but compared to this, it does seem a little bit more satin finish. So if you are going to use these spray bottles, these spray cans, you want to make sure that you really have good ventilation, because it is toxic to breathe these things in. Have a window open. It should be, follow the instructions on the back of the can. That should be a certain temperature. And when you're spraying, make sure you have a large area that you can go back and forth. And you want to spray off to the side as you start. Clear out your can first and follow over and past the edge of your painting and then come back in very easy sprays back and forth. Don't go back and forth like this because you'll get blops at either end when you change your direction. So you want to get, it's better to get a number, 2 or 3 coats of thin than it is to put a thick, because you'll have an uneven surface, especially because this is still paper, it's still a little bit absorbent, so it will absorb at different rates. So in order to get a nice consistent finish, you want to be able to have a couple coats. Follow the instructions on the can, make sure you allow for those drying times in the right temperature. One of the things I don't like about these cans is, you know, unless you clean them properly, sometimes you only get 1 or 2 uses out of them because they clog up. And I think I have a lot of clogged up ones at the moment. So I'm going to show you a different way of doing it. There are different kind of things that are made exactly for this. So Golden offers a gel top coat. Now this one has a UV protection in it. This one's a semi-gloss. This one is a gel top coat with the UV, but it's a gloss. So you have 2 differences here. They're a little bit more liquid, which is great. And you can mix a little bit of water in them to make them thinner. And the thinner you use them, the less likely you're going to have some brush strokes in it. I'm going to be using this one here right now. And this is by Liquitex, and that is a gloss, medium, and varnish. And it tells you in the back that you can add up to about 25% water, and you don't want to vigorously brush or overbrush. So you got to get it on there quick, let it sit, hopefully in a good temperature so that it cures properly. And you could put 1 or 2 coats on that. So I have actually mixed it with about 25% water. And when I mixed it in the water, I used a palette knife, not a brush, because I didn't want to put bubbles in. So the palette knife will give you less bubbles than a brush. And the brush I'm using is not an expensive brush, but it is quite soft. So the softer you have, the less likelihood you're going to have of putting brush strokes in it. I'm going to pick up my liquid, and as I go to brush it on, I'm going to do this very quickly. Look at how I'm holding my brush. I'm holding it from the top, and I'm not over brushing too much. I'm going to catch that edge and pull it across. You don't want to go back and forth, and you don't want to have puddles. You want it to be even across. And of course, it's going to unload the paint at the one side. So you got to make sure you're getting paint all the way, or varnish all the way to the other side. Now this will enhance the color, protect it as well. Hopefully you're using artist colors so that they will be protected. Just making sure I have enough. It is absorbing into the paper, so you want to make sure there's enough on there. So I'm just looking sideways to see if I have any puddles. I'm holding it quite flat to the surface. I don't want puddles, and you got to be careful. I'm getting to the point where you don't want to go over that anymore because you will get brush marks. It dries very quickly. But as I said, it's quite liquid. I'm sure you can tell in there how that gloss just really adds a little bit of depth to the color. Now it is a little bit cloudy, as you can see. It's not entirely clear here, but it will dry entirely clear. And the biggest mistake I found is that I forget that there's paint or there's varnish on there, and that will dry and you will ruin your brush unless you go and rinse that out. So I'm going to let that dry, and perhaps I'll put a second coat on there just to pump it up just a little bit more. I will paint the sides, and I will put it in my floating frame and wrap it up with a bow.
Five drawing cheats for a great painting. Hi, I'm Debbie Reeve, and I'm going to show you how to make a great drawing as a foundation for a great painting, even if you can't draw a straight line. You don't have to be awesome at drawing to make a great painting, but you do need to have a great drawing to make a great painting. No amount of paint can cover up a bad drawing. So give yourself a break and use these cheat methods to create a great start. After all, many of the great artists use these methods to create their own masterpieces. Some of these methods can even help you to learn to draw better by training your eye to see the relationship between shapes and spaces.
So let's jump in with our drawing cheat number 1. Drawing cheat number 1 is going to be tracing directly on paper with backlighting or with a shadow box. I'm going to be demonstrating using my window in daylight, but you can also create a shadow box by using a glass table and putting a light underneath it and shining the light through the bottom of the table. I've even seen hack shadow boxes made out of a shadow box style picture frame with battery operated lights inside, and then you just use the top of the glass to trace your object. All things equal, the window in daylight works out really, really well. You're going to start with a drawing or photograph of what you want to paint. In watercolor, the best practice is never to draw directly on the watercolor paper. And that's because erasing can damage your paper fibers, and that will affect the application of paint. And the same can be said of acrylic as well on paper, especially if you want to leave some whites of the paper. So you want to draw your drawing on a separate piece of paper or have a separate printout of your reference photo, and you want to transfer it lightly to your paper. You want your reference to have a good contrast to make copying easier. You can achieve this contrast by printing out your colored reference photo in black and white and by adjusting the contrast. This makes it much easier to trace. The example on the right shows how I adjusted the contrast to reduce the detail. Your picture might not be as clearly defined as needed, so you can go over some lines with a pen or a marker on your reference to make tracing easier. Just a word about using your own photos or other people's photos for your paintings. It's okay to copy other people's work when you're beginning out in painting. That is, if you don't sell your work. Yes, you might just be so good that someone would like to buy your work. That is how the great master painters learned as students, by copying master painters' work to learn the skills and the techniques. The advantage of using a more seasoned artist's paintings or photo references is that they have worked out compositional problems, they've used principles of design, they understand value and scale, and you may not have the knowledge or skill in those areas yet. Copying is an excellent way that can set you up for good success. So here we have my drawing that I want to trace onto my paper. I have it securely taped on at least 2 sides so it doesn't move or shift when I'm tracing. And this is a lovely picture of my backyard. Of course, it needs to be done in daylight. I've purchased a great table from IKEA for painting, which has this glass area for the very purpose of putting a light beneath it for a shadow box. However, with a window, you're not limited to any certain size. Tracing directly onto your paper is the cleanest, most efficient way to transfer your drawing. This shows 300-gram watercolor paper, and you can see how clearly the line drawing shows through it. Make sure you securely attach the paper over the reference so it doesn't move, especially when you're using more detailed drawing. You're going to want to use an HB pencil to trace, and you want to be as light as you can. You want to avoid using a softer pencil. Pencils come in different softnesses, a 2B, 4B, 6B, 8B. As the number goes higher, the graphite is softer and it will tend to smudge and spread more, which you don't want to do. So if you use an HB pencil, you will have less smudging. You also have to be careful when you're using a harder pencil that you do not score your paper by pressing too hard, because those score lines will show up, especially in watercolor, and you don't want those to show up in your final painting. So here's an example of one that I traced lightly onto my watercolor paper. Now, if you find it's a little too dark, you can take a gum eraser or a knead eraser and very gently rub away some of the dark lines.
And then you don't want to brush it away, the shavings, with your hand. You want to gently blow those away to avoid smudging anything. You can even do this on canvas. This is a canvas with the window method. Drawing cheat number 2, tracing using tracing paper. So tracing paper can be bought at your local art store or stationery store. It is different than wax paper. You do not want to use wax paper, and the reason for that is that the wax actually seals your pencil lines. So in watercolor, you will not be able to erase them. Maybe that doesn't matter so much with acrylic, but if you want to avoid sealing your pencil lines, you do not want to use wax paper. And as you can see, you can clearly see your drawing through it. Once you've traced your drawing, you will use this to transfer to your paper or canvas. I'll show you how to transfer this in drawing cheat number 5. Drawing cheat number 3, tracing using your iPad or computer. I just recently figured this one out. I used to take my reference photo and print it out in different sizes and try to resize it on my computer, but it always took a number of tries to get the size just right. Then I took my iPad and le voila, I could get the perfect size with just a touch of the fingers. You don't need to print it out at all. You just use your tracing paper and very, very lightly trace around the shape, and I'm talking very lightly. Drawing cheat number 4, graphing. Grafting is a great way to enlarge your reference photo without having to do it on your computer. And it also gives you a very natural, more drawing-like result at the end. You take graph paper and photocopy it onto a transparency. You'll see that I have this labeled up at the top, ABC across the top, and numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down the side. This is to help you find which square you're going to be working in. Now, depending on the detail of your reference photo, you could have larger or smaller graph lines. This particular example did not need one quite as detailed as this, but I reuse these transparencies on other photographs. How you will do this is you'll take the alphabetical number at the top and find the square on the bottom, and you're going to be using that square as a reference of the thing that you're drawing. So in this particular example, you'll see the pencil mark is right in the corner, or just beyond the corner where the spout and the top of the lid meet. So you're going to transfer that to your drawing that you do on your substrate that's going to be larger. And you're looking at relationship of spaces within the box. And really that's what drawing is all about, is relationship of spaces, relationship of your negative space and your positive space. In this case, the picture is the positive shape and anything around it is a negative shape. This is the item I'm trying to draw. So you just work on your drawing square by square, and you will come out with really great proportions. Here's a drawing I did. I enlarged this drawing of this camel, and you'll see it has a freer drawing feel to it. It's not as stiff as if I had copied it straight from my reference photo. And the great thing about this, you can adjust it, work it out, make things different. You can compensate actually for photograph distortion. in this process. But you can keep your drawings, and the drawing is the work. And it's very easy if something didn't work out in your painting, you want to try it again, or if someone loved it and you want to do another one, that you've got this paper, and it makes making a second painting of this really easy. Drawing cheat number 5. This is how you transfer onto your paper or your substrate. Now this is called transfer paper. You can buy it in sheets, or you can buy it in this roll. You probably won't need as much as what's in this roll. But there's 2 different types, and sometimes you're not aware of it when you're buying it, so you need to ask. One type is wax-free, and this is the type you want to use if you're transferring to paper or if you're going to be doing watercolor. And as I said before, the wax will seal the pencil. So maybe you want the pencil sealed, so then you want to go for the regular graphite paper. But if you want to be able to erase your pencil lines, you want to go for wax-free. Now, the downside to using the wax-free is that it's easier to smudge. And so when you are tracing, you want to be careful that you don't put your hand resting on it. So the waxed paper actually is waxed to avoid that smudging. There is a right side up and a wrong side down. The darker side is the graphite side, and you want to make sure that that is the side that goes down. I've had many students do their whole drawing the wrong side up, and they get to the end and it's transferred to their reference drawing and not to their paper. You want to secure each of your corners, at least 2 corners, better 3, so to your paper so it doesn't move. And then you want to put your reference drawing on top of your graphite paper, taping 3 edges as well. You want to be able to lift the one corner up so that you can check how you are transferring your drawing, if it's too light or too dark. I also have students that have traced the whole thing and lifted up the corner to check, and nothing went on the paper because they didn't apply enough pressure. And some of them applied way too much pressure, and then they have to work through erasing those. When you're doing your tracing, you want to use a pen instead of a paper. And there's a couple of reasons why you want to do that. For one, your pen puts a color on it and you can see where you have traced and where you haven't. It gives you a thin, consistent line. When you use a pencil, the pencil gets duller as you go and you can't control the nice thin line as well. And you still want to be careful about smudging. So if you tend to put your wrist down on your paper as you are drawing, you want to try and avoid that. And you want to be testing regularly to see if you are pressing too hard or too light. You can use your graphite paper over and over again. It lasts for a long time. If you don't have graphite paper and you are wanting to trace and don't want to make a trip to the store, you can use this hack method. This is a 6B pencil. You want to use as soft a pencil as you can. You turn your reference photo over backwards and you can use your window to see on the other side of the paper, and you scribble over all the lines. And ultimately you're putting graphite all along your lines, and then you can go ahead, turn it over and transfer it to your paper. It doesn't transfer as well, but as a hack job, it works out pretty good. As long as you have a softer pencil. This will not work with an HB pencil. Drawing cheat number 5, resizing your reference photo. So if you have a simple drawing, you don't want to go through the grid method, but you want to expand the drawing you're working on. You can take your reference photo and put it in the left-hand corner, left bottom corner of your new paper, and line it up as so. Then you would take a straight edge and go through the 2 diagonal corners. And this is going to be your expanding line. this is typical when you're expanding photos or cropping something online. You pick the line and you pull it up. So this is the same thing with your drawing. Where the horizontal line meets your diagonal line is where the vertical line is going to start. And you can pull your vertical line down there. Now you have something that is in perfect proportion to your reference photo. And that's really important when you're doing a transfer over and you're trying to relate your shapes to the outward size of the sheet or the canvas you're working on. Your drawing will be different if it's not the same proportion of your reference photo. And that could elongate things or make things look weird. So this is a really great method for ensuring that you have the same proportions as your reference photo. And then you go through the grid method. Here's one I've just drawn big lines and just broken it down. And once you do that, you take your new piece of paper and you divide your new piece of paper as you divide the graph. So there's 5 spaces here, so I will take the new dimension and divide it into 5, and then you list it the same, A to B on the top, and the numbers down the side, and then you begin to draw in the graph method. And there you have it, 5 drawing cheats for a great painting. So what are you waiting for? Start drawing.